This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome to Sunday. If it's Sunday morning, it must be BARD and Gary GPS Smith. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mark?
Excellent. What a day. Gorgeous day.
Beautiful. Raining here in LA. It's unusual for us.
I was up and out with the pups and saw the water running into the flood channel. It was something highly unusual to see. It's like a throwback. Water in LA.
Yeah, one way or another. I'm sure Adam will get sued for it.
Boy, there's a lot of places we could start, but I wanted to get since you're kind of a Twitter and an Elon aficionado. What's your latest take?
I mean, look, there are a lot of people who are sounding the nothing burger alarm. I'm not sure I think it's a nothing burger. I'm also not sure I agree with the people on the other side of the far side of the fence that are shouting about, what they're shouting about. But frankly, what I've been most amused by in the last few hours, last 12 to 18 hours, is that that Matt Taibbi has been posting links to all of his Twitter threads on his Substack. And boy, people are freaking out about how they should not be forced to pay for this information without taking the time to look into the fact that he's just reposting the 45 tweet threads on his Substack. But the people it seem to be all of one side, leaning pretty far right. They are freaking out at the idea that they may have to spend $3 to learn what information they desperately want and need.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. It does not surprise me. I was reading the Barry Weiss thread again, and as we talked about on the big show, it was obvious that they had targeted, at least if you believe her reporting, that they had targeted Dr. J, who we had used, as I'd indicated, as an expert, and that there were also others who were targeted as well. The Dr. J.
Just for anyone who hadn't seen the big show possibly or whatever, this is the screenshot of the back end of Twitter where Dr. J is being limited. You can see there in the yellow, the recent abuse strike, and then the trends blacklist was really the big one, which means no matter what he did or how much his tweets got shared, the back end of the system was restricting his ability to trend on Twitter, which is, basically restricting, exposure.
Correct. And basically muffling his voice.
Yeah.
In real time, as I had indicated on the big show, in real time, November 2020, he was kind of he wasn't a lone voice in the wilderness, but he clearly was being muzzled and had some pretty strong views as to what was happening, and in retrospect, he spot on views on what was going to happen. And they apparently this was somebody who they did not want that voice to be heard.
Yeah, you guys had a declaration from him in one of your cases against the County of Los Angeles about outdoor dining, and you sent it to me. I'm not sure if it's available publicly, but I read it. And while, parts of it are dense in terms of him explaining the science, the parts that are not dense, that are just more him being plain spoken about what this information has led him to opine or believe based on his knowledge, is very straightforward. And at the time, probably, I tried to think back, it was probably pretty controversial, but reading it today, I mean, he was pretty prescient.
Yeah. And that's I think what people would have to be, if you're viewing this as a free marketplace of ideas, so to speak. I've heard that term thrown around so many times. And here you've got people's livelihoods, which were at stake back then, because that's what we were fighting for. 30,000 restaurants, and we're trying to bring a level of sanity to what was going on. It's really something in retrospect. So that's my takeaway from it. I'll move on to another story that we've talked about before. Brett, hat tip to him for bringing it up, which was Murdaugh.
Yeah.
And it looks like they filed a theory, basically a theory of the case. The prosecution has. And for those of you who don't remember, Murdaugh comes from a long line of lawyers in South Carolina, and they were pretty powerful at one point. And then his wife and his youngest son, I believe it was his youngest son, were murdered. Subsequently, he was indicted for financial crimes and then fired from his firm, and is now charged with the murder of his wife and his youngest son. And their theory of the case, you have it in front of you, Gary?
Yeah, basically that he killed his wife and youngest son because of fast approaching personal, legal, and financial ruin. Central to the prosecution's thesis is an alleged decades worth of financial crime, in addition to the 2 counts of murder and associated weapons charges. He also stands accused of myriad financial crimes, including insurance fraud, property fraud, money laundering, and computer fraud. They also allege he stole millions from a fund that should have gone to the family of his late former housekeeper who died on the family's estate. He's also being sued in civil court by his former law firm for allegedly stealing an untold amount of money from different clients. And, as wild as this may sound for anyone who doesn't know exactly what we're talking about, or maybe hasn't been a long time listener, Mark gave a thumbnail there and left out about 4 or 5 wild parts of this story. It's so intertwined and entangled with so many different crazy things. You can't keep it all together.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. The prosecution, I understand that that's their theory, but I don't know how they're going to prove that. I mean, they can prove all of the financial shenanigans, I suppose, on one level. But the idea that they're going to then say that's what caused him to murder his wife and his youngest son, as a theory of the prosecution, I think that's a little bit harder to kind of link up. I think they're going to have some issues with that.
Well, as a layperson who could possibly be sitting on a jury, how exactly do those murders alleviate the fast approaching financial ruin and all of this stuff that they're alleging was the reason for it? You would think that if you could draw a line to, well, there's a $10 million insurance payout on the wife and $5 million on the son, and if he can pull it off, then he'll get the money to save himself. Maybe, but I'm not seeing anyone really drawing that line.
Right, and that's exactly what I think that jurors are going to have a problem with. So it'll be interesting to see. He's got a tremendous defense lawyer, and my guess is they're probably going to capitalize on the fact that you can't draw that line, and you can't necessarily make that leap. And it'll be interesting to see as that unfolds. I really will, because that's quite a, as you said, it's quite a bit to try to have people swallow, if you will, or believe that actually happened.
Especially when you've got, I believe the defense is already to a certain extent telepath that they're going to have a substance abuse defense here, right? I mean, he's gone to rehab. He's certainly done enough that you can point to and go, no sober person in their right mind would think that these actions are going to do what he thought that they were going to do. He hired one of his friends to allegedly try to shoot him so that the remaining son could collect the insurance money, but that didn't work out. And then there was a flat tire. It's all so wild that I think that they're going to have a tough time connecting those dots unless they have evidence that they haven't released yet.
Right. And you have to get over I think one of the things that sometimes is a real problem for prosecutors is this idea of telling a story and having them then take these leaps of faith where there is no evidentiary basis for it. And that's, I think, unless there's stuff that we haven't seen, this filing by the prosecution, I think it's a lot to have a jury buy into. Speaking of juries buy into, it has not been covered tremendously, or at least like his New York case was, but Harvey Weinstein, the jury's been out for either 5 or 6 days now with very few questions. They got past the Friday bewitching hour of 3:00 as we're recording this on Sunday. No note that says we're hopelessly deadlocked. There is kind of an interesting note that came out that talked about or questioned whether the jurors could use the other acts evidence. So in California, it's called 1101 or 1108. In New York, it's called Molyneux, which is they will put on others to testify supposedly as to a motive or signature and or common scheme. And you're supposed to, the jury gets instructions as to what they're supposed to do with that. One of the things they're not supposed to do with that is use it if they don't believe it. Here, it looks like the jury wants to use it. They don't believe it, but they want to use it to undercut the prosecution's theory on the charged acts, which is amazing because that's a feat of intellectual gymnastics that I'm sure the defense is probably embracing right now. I would imagine they would love the idea that jurors are talking about. We not only don't believe the other acts evidence, but we want to use it to undermine the charged acts.
So if you're on his defense team, you're feeling better than you would if no such note came out. But what are you looking for here? Is there still an optimism that they may, acquit him outright?
Well, I think it's just because I think that part of the closing argument said this, that you're here to judge not a movement, but an individual who's been charged. And it shouldn't be a verdict on Me Too. It should be a verdict on the evidence that's before them. So if having said that, I think that's the elephant in the room, and it's very difficult to ask jurors in a kind of 5 years removed from the peak of this era to do an outright acquittal. But it's sure so far the indications are that this is a jury that's very similar to the Masterson jury down the hall that ended up in a tilting for acquittal on all three counts in that case.
Well, that'll be something we'll be watching. Maybe we'll have some more news for you by the time we get to Tuesday this week.
It would not surprise me if Monday afternoon or Tuesday you get a question. Like I say, if you get past that Friday bewitching hour, then I think they want to come back and they want to discuss it. And from the outside looking in, if you're the defense, you're hopeful.
Absolutely. All right, Mark, thank you very much for making some time on a Sunday. We do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Gary. It was good to hear your impressions today. I'll be thinking about this all day long.
Yours as well, sir. And watch out for mudslides. I'm sure they'll be going into Adam Carolla's backyard any moment.
I love it. Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.